Hello, everyone. This is Robert Wenzel. Boy, what a time to launch a new podcast about the economy. The economy is an absolute mess. We've been in lockdown for months. Unemployment has skyrocketed. Businesses are shut down. We're only now slowly coming out of the lockdown. I think we'll do okay as far as coming out of the lockdown, but I see a bigger problem down the road. Price inflation. I think it's going to really wreak havoc with the economy, and everyone needs to be prepared. Most won't, but you should be. I'm going to detail the data. I'm going to make the analysis on this first episode of This Week in Economics.
Welcome to This Week in Economics with Robert Wenzel.
Okay, so here's the thing. There's a connection between how much money is in the economy and where the general price level is. It's not exact, and it's very, very dangerous to look at a small increase in the money supply and say, therefore, prices will go up. A very famous economist by the name of Milton Friedman, he was a Nobel Prize winner, got into trouble in the 1980s by forecasting inflation when the money supply was climbing, but it wasn't a severe climb in the money supply. It was a case where the money supply was going up, but there were other things going on in the economy. We had massive increases in productivity, which means there were a lot more goods and services around, and there was probably a desire to hold cash balances that was fairly strong. Now, if people are holding cash balances, which means they just basically, keep the money in their wallet, in their pocketbooks, whatever, and not spending part of their money, that's not out there bidding up prices. So you have to be very, very, very careful when you say an increase of the money supply is going to cause price inflation. Now, there's another economist by the name of Friedrich Hayek, also a Nobel Prize winner, who said, although there is not a direct connection between an increase in the money supply and an increase in prices, it's a good thing if the majority of people think there is such a connection, because it's a close connection. The more money you pump in, the stronger are the odds that you're going to have some kind of increase in prices. And what's going on now in the United States of America is absolutely stunning with regard to the increase in the money supply. Now, I track money supply on a weekly basis, and I've been doing it for a very long time, for decades. So I've seen ups and downs in the money supply, and I've seen when there's been money supply pumped in and you can see it's pushing up prices. Because basically what's going on, if you have to take the sort of the basic case, if you have a fixed number of goods out there and people have more money in their pocketbooks, then what's going to happen is you have more money available to bid up prices. So that's the basic level. And then, of course, you have all the variations off that I discussed to some degree. So I've watched money supply for a very, very long time, and it generally tends to grow. This is created by the Federal Reserve, the central bank in the United States, between 3% and 8%. You can have it higher. I've seen it in double digits, lower double digits, and it sometimes can go down pretty close to zero, but pretty much it's in the 3 to 8% range. Now, right now, since the lockdown has started in the United States, so roughly I'm talking about 3 months, maybe just a little bit short of that, maybe 10 or 11 weeks. Money supply is growing at an annual rate of 52.1%. Let me repeat that. Money supply growth is now at 52.1% on an annualized basis. Now, the specifics of the way I calculate money supply, I look at 13-week money supply growth and I annualize it. I discuss why I do this and exactly how I calculate the number in a book I've got called The Fed Flunks, My Speech at the New York Federal Reserve. I am not a big fan of the Federal Reserve, and I will never guaranteed be invited to give a speech at the New York Federal Reserve again. But if you want an interesting take on what the Federal Reserve has done, which is not supportive of the Federal Reserve at all, but highly entertaining speech, pick up the Fed Flunks. Now, in the appendix, I go into the details of how I calculate the money supply, where I get the data, what specific data I look at, and so on. But the key right now is to simply understand that the money supply is growing at 52.1%. And the Federal Reserve has never printed money like this ever before. In the last 40 years, there's been two periods when it did hit roughly 20%. When Ben Bernanke was, quote unquote, saving the economy after the 2008 financial crisis, money supply growth climbed to roughly 20%. In August of 1982, Federal Reserve Chairman at that time, Paul Volcker, reversed his battle against price inflation and started increasing the money supply very, very aggressively. And that also hit roughly 20%. But we're way, 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 way beyond that. We're at, again, 52.1%, and all indications are that the money supply growth is going to climb even more dramatically. We're going to see higher levels than this. Now, just to put this in perspective, what a 52.1% annualized rate means, that if this rate would continue over a full year, for every $100 in your wallet, you would need $152 to keep pace with the amount of money the Federal Reserve is printing. If you had $1,000 in your checking account, you would need $1,521 to keep pace. That is incredible number as far as an increase in the money supply, and that money is available to bid prices up. Now, it may not all be spent. There might be some people concerned about the economy, and so they will husband the money they have and not spend it all. But when you've got a 15.1% increase, you're going to have a lot of money leaking out, a lot of new money into the system. And I expect within a couple of months, you're going to start to see that in the government inflation index measures. Now, it's really not showing up in the general number right now. The 12-month growth in the consumer price index is at 1.2% as of the end of May. And I attribute that mostly to the fact that there's discounting in certain areas. Right now, because of the lockdowns, we're not seeing much in terms of plane travel. We're not seeing much in terms of hotel bookings. They are way, way down. So you've got those areas discounting prices. But in the areas where people are actually buying, you're starting to see the increases. The CPI number for food that's bought for home consumption is growing in an annualized rate of 4.8% right now. So that's very, very high. Your President Nixon put wage and price controls on the economy when the price inflation was at 4%. So you've got food prices growing at a level that was a concern when Nixon was president. Now, I expect that the overall index, once these discounts stop, which they will, and sort of bottom out in the next month or two, I expect inflation to eventually hit conservatively 5%. Now, I'm saying 5% because I don't want to give the sense that I think we're going into a Weimar Republic inflation that occurred in Germany, where inflation was increasing at 1,000%, 10,000% people had to carry money around in wheelbarrows because there was so much money being printed. There were notes that were common on the street, with 6, 7 zeros after them. I don't expect that, at least anytime soon. There's no indication that's going to happen. But I certainly expect 5% inflation over a year. And I would not be surprised if it gets to 10 or 12%. I'm not forecasting that. I want to be conservative here. I don't want to spook people. But the price inflation, given the amount of money supply that's being printed, is going to be really something else. Now, what's really amazing about this is that the Federal Reserve, which is the organization that is responsible for increasing the money supply, they don't see a problem. They think that there's a possibility of deflation, and they're fighting deflation. Now, there's a whole question as to whether the Federal Reserve should be manipulating the money supply at all, manipulating interest rates at all, targeting inflation. They have a bizarre target of 2%. Why would you have a target of 2%? That there's no economic justification for that. But they fear that price inflation is not going to hit 2%. Their models are not taking into account how things change. They have in a very important sense, they have static models. All they're looking at is what's happened over the last few years, where inflation has been low. It has generally been under 2%. And they're sort of forecasting that into the future. They have projections out that into the year 2022, that inflation is going to be under 2%. They have forecast that the interest rates they control will be under 1%. This is not how I'm looking at the economy at all. This is a major failure, I believe, by the Federal Reserve in understanding how the economy works. I think what they're doing is irresponsible. I think inflation is going to get way out of control, largely because one reason is once it starts to uptick, when it gets to 2% and then 3%, they're still not going to be concerned. And they're not going to sort of slow things down until inflation hits 5%, and then things could get really out of control. So that's my forecast. And I've been critical about the Federal Reserve before. I warned about the subprime mortgage. I wrote a paper about it after 2 New York Federal Reserve economists wrote a paper saying there was no housing bubble. I responded to that and said before the housing crash that they were absolutely wrong. In real time, I warned about the crash of the economy in 2008. I said Ben Bernanke did not understand what he was doing relative to what he wants to do. Now, again, my view is they shouldn't be manipulating the money supply at all. But I thought in 2008 that he didn't understand what he was doing from his perspective, and that he was sending the economy into crash mode, which is what occurred. So this is my new call. My new call is that the Federal Reserve is completely irresponsible with regard to what they're doing by printing all this money. And what it will mean is very, very high price inflation that most people are not going to be prepared for. Gold is going to go much higher. That's radical. The inflation is going to do something else. It's going to cause, I believe, sometime in next year, in 2021, the federal government, to put price controls on the economy. That's to battle the inflation that the Federal Reserve created. Now, it's possible we might slip through without this, but it's looks like a very strong possibility to me, and that'll just jam things up more for the economy overall. It'll create shortages. It will result in not only the high prices that we'll be experiencing because of the price inflation, but then there'll be situations where we won't be able to buy products. It'll be, in many ways, a lot like the lockdown we have now, except more severe across many parts of the economy. Right now, the economy is shut down in many areas, so we just can't buy things. But anything you can buy from Amazon is still available. But if price controls come on and there's an inflation at the same time, those things do not work together. You have to have market prices to bring goods out. That's what market prices are all about. Businesses just shut down those areas where they can't make money. And so it limits the availability of lots of products. So that's a further possible danger down the road. Right now, it's irresponsible Federal Reserve money supply printing that will, without a doubt, increase prices across the board. Like right now, we're seeing it in food prices, but it's going to grow. We're only a couple of months away from the start of that. And then once that kicks in, after the new year, it doesn't matter who's president, if Donald Trump is reelected or Joe Biden is elected president or someone else becomes president. It doesn't matter. The government knee-jerk reaction to problems that are really created by the government, by the Federal Reserve wing of the government, their knee-jerk reaction is more regulations. It's against the basics of economics, and it'll just make things worse. But that's what we're headed for. That's what I see. Talk to you next week.